We're sitting down with Lamar Slay, and we're talking about capital campaigns, and we're going to jump right into a topic that many pastors want to know about, and that's money. So how much money would a pastor expect to raise in this 3-year capital campaign?
Okay. If anybody could answer that question, they could write a book and retire, because that's probably the number one question. And there are a lot of factors in your local church. All those factors are found within your local church, and every church is different. Mm-hmm. Typically, you'll hear that a church can raise 2 to 3 times their annual giving in a 3-year campaign. Mm. Well, the truth is, and I've just kind of kept records of campaigns that I've been involved in, typically it's 1.5 to 2 times your annual giving. That's if it's a healthy church. Mm. If everything's in place, there's good publicity, there are good testimonies that you share with your congregation of giving testimonies. If everything's done good and right, then typically it's 1.5 to 2 times your annual giving. If you receive more than 2 times your annual giving, and by that I mean your general operation budget, mm-hmm. whatever that is, if you see more than 2 times that committed on a 3-year campaign, you're going to have some large gifts. And by that I mean you're going to have some gifts that are 5 to 10% of the total amount that you raise. Mm-hmm. To go beyond 2 times, I've never seen a campaign that didn't have that. Mm-hmm. And some churches have people in their congregation that have the potential to do that. Mm-hmm. Some don't. Mm-hmm. But if you do that, you're going to have the large deals. Another way to look at it, and I was asked this so many times, I went back and kind of tracked some campaigns I've been involved in, is that for every $1 million you see raised in commitments in a 3-year campaign, mm-hmm. you're going to have 125 to 150 commitment cards turned in. Mm. And that's true in small churches, big churches, country churches, city churches, doesn't matter. Mm. That's what the averages say. Now, if you're in a startup church, a new church, and you're reaching all young couples, it may take more commitment cards than that, because all your people are just starting in their jobs and their occupations. If you're in an older church where you've got a core of people that tithe regularly, you may see that number go down. So all those factor into what you actually see raised in a church.
So I think about a pastor who's got a big vision, and they might have a church of X, number, but they want to say, we're gonna build the American Airlines Center, Yeah. Yeah. Now, a good parameter then would come back to this and say, actually, what's your yearly budget? And now let's look at that in a capital campaign.
And the situation is there. Sometimes pastors try to have a campaign too soon. They haven't accumulated that critical mass of people who will buy into the vision to do that. Sometimes we think if we have a campaign, it'll cause us to grow. And that's just not true. You can go across America on Sunday morning and you can see tons of churches that have big auditoriums, and there's few people in their parking lots that are empty. Just because you have a facility is not going to guarantee growth. Mm-hmm. Again, when you get that critical mass together where your building has become a hindrance to you reaching people, then you need to start thinking about expansion. You need a certain number of families that you can cast vision to in order to see some of these things. And what we do is we get lazy, and we try to have a campaign too soon because we're tired of setting up and tearing down in the school. We're tired of being nomads as far as the church goes. But it's really critical that you hang in there till you get that critical mass to do that first campaign.
And that is a great segue to the next question I have is what is usually sort of the source of those commitments? You talked about getting a critical mass. In that critical, what are we talking about? Who are those people who are usually the source of those commitments?
Great question. Normally in a campaign, you'll see somewhere between 10 to 20% of not the commitment cards, but of the amounts. You'll see 10 to 20% of what you raise come from your large donors. And when we say large donors, we're talking about people that would commit to give usually on the lower end around $50,000 a year over 3 years. We kind of consider that a large donor. The second group is your spiritual leadership, the leaders in your church. Typically, you'll see 30 to 40% of your total commitment come in from that group. The third group are your congregation. They're people that love your church, they're committed to it, they come regularly, they just may not be in a leadership position. You'll see another 30 to 40% come in from that group. And in the last group, and this may sound a little funny to people, but your attenders, your non-members who come on a regular basis. Usually, if they are challenged correctly, you can see 5 to 10% of your commitments come in from that group. People that have kids and know you're building a children's space, they want their kids to be able to participate in that. So your non-members will give if properly challenged with the vision that God's laid in front of you.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm thinking about the pastor who is finding their congregations in debt, and they need to actually get that resolved and reduced. How hard is it? How difficult is it to build a campaign around debt reduction?
Debt reduction is the hardest money to raise. Your levels, as far as I won't say the easiest to raise, but a relocation is easy to present. A new auditorium is important. New children's space is important. But when you get down to raising money to reduce debt, you have to be very strategic in how you present that. Typically, when a church wants to reduce debt, it's because that debt is hindering their ministry. They're taking money that they could be put in outreach, and they're having to pay the mortgage. So they have a debt reduction. Well, if you do all your publicity about debt reduction, that just doesn't sound good to people. But if you talk about the ministry expansion that a debt reduction would allow you to do, and you cast vision for those new ministries, you cast vision for that new staff position you want to create, if you cast vision for those kind of things as a result of the debt reduction, that's a different story. So in a campaign where you're reducing debt, you want a lot of testimonies of people who've been reached by your church. You want to tie that into there's so many other couples and families that we need to reach. And if we can reduce this debt, it'll free us up to have those outreach ministries. You just have to be careful that you're not in bondage to debt. There are a lot of churches that are debt free, and that's great. If that's where God has led them, that's often. One of the largest campaigns I was ever involved in was a church that paid everything up front, no borrowing whatsoever. There are other churches that are okay with an amount of debt that doesn't affect their ministries. And that's the key. So whatever the church's philosophy, and back to DNA, whatever the church's DNA in that is, then that's where the decision has to be made of the size of the project. And do we need to reduce this debt in order to expand the ministries that God has given us?